You are listening to Dream and Do, a podcast for big-hearted creatives. My name is Nicola Ray Wickham and I'm a creative coach and strategist obsessed with helping people just like you to amplify your voice, center your creativity and wellness and make a real meaningful contribution to the world. Your whole self is welcome to this table and you're invited to pull up a chair and join me for pep talks, soulful insights and practical tips on all things creativity, marketing, truth-telling and story sharing, and powerful conversations with amazing wholehearted humans who are dreaming and doing in action and disrupting the status quo as they go. This is the stuff you're going to wish you knew years ago, but don't worry, we're doing this in community, you are not alone and it's not too late. This is our time. Hey loves, and welcome to the Dream and Do podcast. So what I have lined up for you is a treat. I have a number of episodes that I recorded in late 2020 with amazing women who are dreaming and doing in action. And those episodes hadn't seen the light of day until now. I had recorded them with so much enthusiasm and energy as we were in between lockdowns, but we didn't know that at the time, right? But we were in between lockdowns. And then lockdown 3 hit and just scuppered all of my plans, and I practice what I preach and prioritize. And unfortunately, the podcast did not make the cut. As much as I love it, I had to really strip down and it didn't make the cut. But now there is the space for the podcast to come back, and I am so excited to get these episodes out into the world. And I've got some help. I've got an amazing podcast editor in Erin. Shout out Erin. And they are coming at you. Today's episode is with Nehanda from Soul Mama, and what we talked about then is just as relevant now, right? You will know that context is really important to me, and for us to sit in the seat of where we are. And when we had this conversation, Nehanda, within her work anyway, talks a lot about restoration and rest and real deep wellness. And our conversation is contextualized where we were then, which isn't too dissimilar to where we are now. So it is still so resonant. There is so much in this conversation that I know there are so many of you need to hear. So Nehanda is Soul Mama, and she works with women in their motherhood journey, from conscious conception right through to being in the trenches of motherhood. And she draws on various modalities that she has trained in, from energy work to holistic wellness coaching and womb yoga therapy, to help these women. And what I love about her is that she comes from this real ancient approach of gently guiding our systems back into balance and harmony and allowing the natural flow of energy and vitality to flow. There is something deeply healing about this woman in her voice alone. I'm really looking forward to you hearing from her. So here's the episode with Nehanda Truscott-Reid. Enjoy. Nehanda, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, lovely. I'm so looking forward to connecting with you.
Me too. I feel like I've wanted you on the podcast for a while, and then it's become even more like prevalent and relevant to have you on.
Right.
Like, your message is so needed right now.
Bless you. I just feel like we're in crazy times, right? Like, we're really living into times where I'm just like, wow, we are witnessing history in the making, and we're all being called to take a stand and to decide and to choose how we're going to navigate this circumstance that we find ourselves in. So thank you for creating space where we can have these wholehearted conversations, and for your work and your message too, because I think, yeah, we all need that permission slip just to continue to show up no matter what, you know.
Thank you. That really does mean a lot. And the reason why, again, why I'm so excited to speak to you is because I know the women that I work with and the women that are attracted to my message, they need to hear yours as well. Because I talk a lot about, like, obviously showing up wholeheartedly, and it's wonderful, but it's not always easy. And when you're bringing your whole self to the table, and just to caveat for the listeners, that doesn't mean sharing the kitchen sink. Like, you don't have to share everything to bring your whole self. But when you're doing that, you need to feel as well as you can.
Definitely.
Right? It's not like, you know, when you go to a corporate role in a job that you don't really where you have to hide parts of yourself. That's exhausting as well. Yeah, we can definitely get into that. That's exhausting as well. But when you're showing up wholeheartedly, whether that's in corporate or in life or in your own business, it requires a different level of resource.
Definitely. I think it's about self-acceptance and self-love, and also kind of non-apologeticness for all of the messiness that is our lives. And I think the ways that, you know, capitalism and social media will have us believing that only parts of ourselves are acceptable in particular spaces. And so I think growing up in this society, we're all really well versed in compartmentalizing and masking and hiding and denying and, you know, forcing ourselves into situations that don't really resonate. And if any of us are in a position where we're actually seeking to live more authentically and to live from a place of truth and not from a place of hiding, then it does require this space and time to really face who we are, you know, all parts of ourselves, and then to choose to be unapologetic with how we're moving through life, how we're moving through our relationships, how we're moving through our work. And it's a practice, like you say. It's not an overnight thing. It's not a one-time decision. It's a continuous, moment by moment kind of checking in, like, where am I acting from in this moment? Where am I coming from? You know, am I trying to prove, or am I trying to pretend or to perform? All of the P's, right? I just noticed that. Or can I just be? Can I just be? And that is simple as it sounds, is really hard for a lot of us. And so it requires that self-compassion and that self-love to navigate that with a little bit more grace and a little bit more ease. So yeah,
You're speaking my language.
Literally. I'm just so grateful to be able to be in a position where I can support women in that way, you know, because I feel like these are the real conversations. This is the real work, and everything else is as a result of how much we're able to do that. So yeah, thank you for creating space for us to get into it.
Already. So tell us about you, like, what do you do? And
yes. So I'm a holistic wellness coach for women on the path of motherhood. So I support women from preconception who may or may not be struggling with fertility, who are having questions around identity and what it means to move into motherhood in a conscious way. And I offer that support continuously through to sacred pregnancy and postpartum wellness, and then into motherhood and how we can thrive and navigate that with more ease. So yeah, I created the Soul Mama journey because that spoke to me as to what motherhood actually is. It's not about, you know, the gadgets and the pretty clothes and the photos and, you know, all of the surface things that we think that we want. It, to me, is a real deep awakening and opportunity for healing on a soul level. So that's the work that I felt called to do when I realized that I couldn't find it when I became a mother myself. And I was yearning for conversations that just went deeper than how much does your baby weigh, and, you know, have your stitches healed, and, you know, like just so much deeper. I just felt like I was going into a spiritual rites of passage and initiation, that none of the tools that I had acquired up until that point weren't really hitting the spot. And even though I was technically supported in a really loving relationship, still am, had family, I still felt so alone. And I just felt like there is a resource that I'm being asked to give that I haven't actually nurtured in myself. And so that was my commitment to kind of honoring that and following that path and training as a holistic wellness coach to really understand energy and how that works and how our spiritual kind of karma shows up in our lives and how that gets triggered with our parenting and in our children, and just bringing in all of the things that I now am super passionate about into this application for mothers, so that we could be more resourced and more strong in that path and on that journey.
Sounds delicious. It really does. So let's bring it to the present day and parenting in a pandemic.
Yeah, I feel like, everybody talks about unprecedented times. To me, I'm always viewing, life and I guess the macro on the lens of parenting. Like, how is this affecting families? How is this affecting the parent-child relationship? How is this affecting the evolutionary arc? Because to me, that's the most important question to be asking, is like, what we're doing on an individual level and on a collective level doing to enable us to move forward, or is it actually regressing us backwards, right? And I feel like so much of what we're sold as progress is actually really regressive and actually detrimental to life force. If we think about, that's a whole next conversation. I feel myself going into
the next podcast episode.
next podcast episode. But I just feel like so much of the messaging that we've been receiving has been about giving up our power and about moving from a space of fear and about not trusting life and not trusting the world, not trusting nature. And so these narratives, as I see them play out, leave us in a really disempowered space, which inevitably shows up in the ways that we are in our relationships, and it shows up in the way we're able to be present or not for our children. And so even just on a very practical level, the fact that single parents have been having to juggle working from home or furlough or redundancy or losing jobs and not being connected to a food source necessarily, where we're then, really pressured to then be thinking about how do we actually sustain ourselves and our families. And when we're living in a way that's so far removed from the kind of natural order of things, it leaves us feeling really out of control. And so I don't know about you, but the first thing I did was plant I just planted up a whole set of beds of food, because I realized like this was something I've wanted to do for ages, but it just really kind of struck like these things that have been in the future really need to come into the present right now, because we need to be in a space of our own power, right? And being able to be as close to our health and our vitality as possible. So for me, that was like growing my own food and just kind of getting really clear on the ways that we spend our money as a family, what we could kind of cut back on, and then thinking about how do we spend our time, and how that was being impacted by the fact that we were all at home when we'd never been before together. And so I know that ish got real quick. I think the first couple of weeks I was like, oh, this is amazing, because families who perhaps, where the father has been out at work all the time, or the mother has been at home kind of managing the home load and the children, maybe that dynamic is now has the opportunity to be more balanced, and men are getting to be rebonded with their children. And I was like looking at this as a real big opportunity for families. And then I think about 3 weeks in, I was like, no, there's a reason. There's a reason why we've been doing the roles that we've been doing. And to a certain extent, that was working. And I think we have adapted to the parts of ourselves that have been used to being out of the home and kind of turning on the work hat and then coming back home and turning on the present hat. And where that became boundaryless, I think it put a major strain energetically on parents. And so that's the thing that I'm really feeling into now with clients who maybe have children who are going back to school. And whilst everyone else has kind of discovered a new language or picked up a new hobby or is like overkill on the yoga virtual classes, the parents are like, I am tired, you know, like, when do I get to exhale? And I think this has been the first opportunity where parents are really just getting a moment to just recalibrate and be like, okay, I'm potentially having the space and time to be back with myself. You know, what have I taken from this period of time? What can I learn? And how can I prepare myself for any eventuality in which this may be called for again?
Oh my gosh, it's like you're in my head right now, literally.
But I'd love to hear how it's been for you. And
goodness, it has been, well, it's really interesting you're saying about there were some people who like learnt a language over the last 6 months, and then there were those of us, well, me, who was like barely feeling like I was surviving on certain days. So it's been it's funny because when I was in it, I was just firefighting on one hand, and on one hand just really enjoying it. Also, like business-wise, it was my most abundant time.
Oh wow,
so
that's
that
amazing.
was just amazing. Yeah, and I was so surprised when it hit. I was voice noting my friends like, oh my gosh, like everything's going to come crashing down, and it was the complete opposite. Creatively, I was kind of flourishing, but I also recognize it's part of me going into old patterns of do, right? Like threat of trauma hits. I'm very much flight or freeze. I'm flight. I'm like, let's get going. Like, and so it bore fruit for me. But definitely with my daughter going back to school, I exhaled. And when I exhaled, I realized that I was knackered.
Right.
And I'm like, I had a real moment where I was like, I don't know if I could do that again. Having done it, I don't know if I can do it again. So now I'm in the process of simplifying, stripping back, so that if and when I'm able to handle it differently, because I was and still am exhausted from it. So and for me it was a real time of learning that all of the feelings can coexist. All of the emotions can coexist, all of the occurrences can coexist. It can be an abundant time, but also fueled with fear. It can be creative, and then it can be stagnant. It can be all of the polar opposites, almost sitting in one space. And then we had Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
Laid on top, like, right? So, but parenting wise, I don't know. I've always looked at you and like, I just want to be more Nehanda.
Oh, babes, I'm touched by that. My children and husband will probably say, no, you actually don't.
No, honestly, like, yeah, I love your approach, and yeah.
Thank you.
Inspiring.
No, I really felt what you were saying about that kind of triggering of old survival modes. You know, I think especially when we're in a space of pressure, especially if our livelihoods are threatened or our finances are threatened, it's going to bring out the best and worst. You know, it can really kind of supercharge any creativity and any productivity, because we're having to be so focused with the time that we do have that you realize like, oh my gosh, in that 1 hour window whilst baby was napping, I actually did like more than I would have done in a day, like, you know, at another time. And yet energetically it still takes the same focus. It still takes the same intentionality and willingness and kind of conviction to show up in that way consistently. And that does take a toll if we're not making extra care to continue to nourish ourselves and to have these times of where we're switched off and where we're giving ourselves permission to not be doing all of the things. And so I hope in this window, now that you've actually had a bit more of a space to just, you know, breathe and to be, that there is that opportunity to kind of recalibrate on a deeper level, because for the long term it's unsustainable. And I think that's what we're realizing is like, cool, we could do that for a couple of months, but our systems cannot maintain that level of activation going forward. And so being able to kind of know how we reset our own nervous systems and being able to kind of self-regulate and to give our children the examples of what that looks like, I think is super powerful, a lesson that we can take from this time.
Absolutely. Something I come back to is that this is a marathon and not a sprint. And I take that on everything when it comes to business, parenting, relationships, everything. And it also is for this time.
Definitely.
This is the marathon and not the sprint. And I know that I definitely approached it like it was a sprint the last 6 months, and that cannot continue at all.
I hear.
It's been really interesting. I've seen a lot of talk around when you talked about the, like, almost the family dynamics and this kind of thinking that, oh, well, maybe there'll be more balance. And what I've seen and experienced as well is that a lot of it fell on the women in the household. What are your thoughts or your observations?
So I think from my own experience, what I saw was, I think my husband preempted that he would be in a position to embrace the fullness of what being at home with the children actually meant. So we're both self-employed. So we were kind of working around each other and just kind of tapping each other in. And so on paper, it was pretty much kind of 50-50 for a lot of that time. But his ability, I guess, to feel comfortable with that and what he would choose to do in those spaces and times where he had the children, like, it really revealed to me the differences between the masculine and the feminine and like the kind of mother role and the father role. So he is used to his value being, and I know this is true for a lot of couples that I've kind of supported, he's used to his value being in his ability to provide, right? And so that's a tangible thing that he can say at the end of the month or the end of the week, like, I have done this and that is my contribution to the greater whole of the family. And we all are grateful and appreciative and show that to him. So when that was kind of on pause for a minute, I think it really questioned, like, well, where is my value? What do I bring? But also, how can I show up for these children in a way that's not just providing financially, you know? And so what I felt was that there was a lot more of the triggers that perhaps wouldn't have happened so close together, because you would normally have a working day or a working week, and then you'd come back home and you'd have the weekend and you'd make an effort to make that time really playful and joyful, and then you go back to work. And so those things may have not shown up as clearly as they definitely have done in my own home. And what I was seeing echoed back to me with the women that I'm serving is that sense of, like, first of all, it's this, and then it's this, and then it's this. It's like an onslaught of triggers, right? It was like the intensity just got dialed up to 10. And it was just very revealing to realize, like, wow, the resourcing we've been called to kind of heal, the rate of healing that is being called for is more than we've ever done before and deeper than we've ever done before. And so we're being called to show up more consistently, more deeply, and with less resistance than we've probably got away with doing before. And so I felt like, for me, what got me through that time and what continues to serve me now and what I've fed back to my clients was, how can we always continue to reframe this as the opportunity for healing, as the opportunity for connection, as the opportunity to evolve your family forward, or to redefine values, or to recommunicate roles, or to, you know, decide how we're going to move through this differently. It may be that the roles that we've been used to holding and that have been serving us really well for the last X number of years aren't going to be serving us in this moment in time. How willing are we to be flexible with this and show up for each other differently? And so it took a lot of communication, a lot of self-reflection, a lot of honesty and willingness to deal with the shit as it hit the fan, and really be like, okay, it's not looking pretty, but we have a choice. Where do we move from here? And I think it's crucial, in any relationship, that's going to be what happens. But I think it's crucial to continue to maneuver through that in a way that your children can actually see that it's being worked through. I think we came from a generation where I know a lot of my peers' parents would not kind of disagree in front of them, or there was that sense that, mum and dad were always on the same page, and they always hid whatever was kind of not working for each other away from the children. And lockdown didn't give us that luxury. Things would have bled into the fact that children were present. And so for me, I was like, okay, well, it's not about beating ourselves up about the fact that we've disagreed over something in front of our children, but it's not just putting this conversation to a point where these children are going to be asleep and then we can pick it back up again. It's showing them that we actually have the tools to be able to work through it and reach a resolution. And if that's not happening now, right in this moment, then we come back and we say, this is how we've worked it out. Or, that time when mummy and daddy were angry with each other, this is why, and this is why we're now in a better place about it. Or this is what we're going to do differently. So I think in just terms of family dynamics, it allowed us to deepen and heal in a way that I have not experienced before. And so for that, I'm grateful.
I love that you use the word heal in all of this. I love that. And the example that you gave about disagreements in front of children resonates so hard. Like my mum and dad would very rarely disagree in front of my brother and I, and it was part of that united front type thing. And my husband and I are different in that respect. And the pandemic definitely, the intensity of the situation definitely showed that. But I went back to trusting myself and what felt good and true and right to me, which was part of the lessons of the pandemic, going back to self-trust, like you said. And it was about showing up in our wholeness and showing that, not everybody always gets on, but we all love each other. And that was a conversation I actually had with my daughter. It's that kind of, sometimes people don't get on, but we love each other.
And actually that disagreement is not the worst thing in the world. Actually, it can be really healthy. And so the fact that, mummy might say one thing and daddy might say another, or mummy does something one way and daddy does things another, it's to really appreciate that there isn't one truth, there isn't one answer, there isn't one right way, that we are just doing the best that we can with what we've got. And this is the ways that we've felt into right now, and that might change. And so I think it brought a maturity to my daughter. She's only 5, but I think it brought an emotional maturity to her that I've seen has now carried her back into relationships with friends and just her views on the world and what family means and what it means to be in relationship. It's definitely, I think done a lot of good in that sense. And I think, there are couples and individuals who may not have felt like they've come through the other side of that and may still be in the thick of that. Maybe things haven't reset or rebalanced yet, and to just realize that the path doesn't always look the way that we expect it to look, and there are always going to be parts that are kind of beyond our control. But how can we come back to the things that we know to be true, the things that are really medicine for us? And often it's as simple as the breath. Are all my needs met in this moment right here, right now?
Yes.
And often it's a yes, right? All of the worry, all of the concern, all of the burdening, all of the projection, all of those are habitual reactions to things that often haven't even happened. And so the more we can just continue to bring ourselves and rein ourselves into this present moment, the more power we have to show up differently.
And that's a power that no one can take away from us, right?
Exactly. And no one can give to us. That's the other thing, you know, what you described about realizing that you had to come back to that self-trust. It was that sense that, you know, we're all in a particular boat. Yes, that experience might be looking quite different for different people in different stages of life and with different circumstances, but we all have a choice of how we're going to respond to this situation. And nobody's necessarily coming to save me in this. So I have to dig deep to find that for myself and to sustain myself for the marathon, and not just for the sprint, right?
I found so I've got a membership, and it used to be called Dream and Do, which is the name of the podcast, and I actually changed the name of it a couple of weeks ago, and part of it was because of the experience I had over lockdown, and it's now called Root and Rise.
Oh, beautiful.
And part of it is because what really helped me over the last 6 months is that feeling of feeling rooted. And that was so important to me. So I would go to the local woods, and I had my favourite tree, and it was like, that's like real kind of bringing the metaphor to life. Yeah. But then it translated into so many different things. And what I get from your work when I hear your words and read your words is that sense of rootedness, like rooting back into who you are, what makes you feel grounded. So yeah, powerful stuff.
And I love the root to rise. I think, you know, you talk about it in the literal sense, and of course, like that's medicine to the soul, you know, reconnecting in a space of nature, being able to actually access the wisdom that is there for all of us. And what I have come to know that is true is that even on the days where you can't get out into nature, you can, through visualization, through meditation, through intention, you can root yourself powerfully into your body and into the resources that are kind of beyond ourselves, you know. And so a lot of the work that I do in sessions with women is about experiencing what that feels like and guiding them through that in a visualization or a meditation or a breath exercise, in a way that they can feel that grounding actually happening in a tangible way, and they can bring their attention, their energy into their bodies, kind of pooling all parts of yourselves that are normally like frayed out into the disparate past and present, and just calling that all back into yourself so that you can anchor and you can be here right now, and then choose, and then move, and then speak, you know, and not be in the space of action or activity without having any of that space to actually ground. And women really resonate with that.
We can do that any time, like you said.
Exactly.
Even in a pandemic.
Exactly. Even in your house, you know, even in your house.
Hey loves, so I am interrupting this episode with something that you are going to want to know about. Write Your 2021 Story is back. Some of you will remember that this was the reflection and reviewing ritual that I do every year and share with you. And as always, I did it in January. And this year, given everything that we are all still going through, it felt like a good idea to bring it back midway through the year. So that's what I wanted to mention to you today. Write Your 2021 Story is back for a check-in. This is your mid-year reset and refresh. Think of it like a heart-led audit and appraisal of your work and life. A chance to pause and reflect and really set your course for the rest of the year. This isn't a FOMO-inducing activity. It's not meant to be designed to make you feel like there's not enough time and I've got to make the most of it. But it is there to say, hold on, the vision that you set for yourself in January, how are you doing with that? Once we get into the trenches of life, it is so easy to forget all of the energy that we had in the beginning of the year for thinking and musing on how we wanted to be. And the purpose of this reset and refresh is so that you don't get to the end of the year and go, oh, I slept walk through that, I drifted through it. This is about bringing in some gentle intention and for us to do that together. So it's super easy. We get started on Monday the 14th of June. For 5 days, you'll receive a daily email from me with a short and sweet practice that is designed to help you to reconnect and reimagine so that you can continue into the second half of the year fueled with intention. The link to sign up is below this podcast episode. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to journeying with you. Let's talk about rest, because you did a masterclass in Tamu from Live 360's membership a little while ago that literally just rocked my world. I was like, yeah. And I have a complex relationship with rest. It's getting better, and your workshop was definitely a big catalyst for it.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah, even today, I instead of joining a group coaching call, I went and had a nap because Marley's sleep is atrocious, but we won't talk about that.
Bless.
Yeah, tell us about rest.
I just want to speak to the fact that children's sleep is kind of irregulated at the moment, because I don't see that as disparate to, you know, what we're talking about in this kind of collective field of energy. And I think it's really important to be discerning and sensitive to the ways that our children are communicating with us, because especially when they're young, it's not going to be through language. And so we're having to really show up for them in a way that gives them that consistency and that safety and that reassurance that all is well. And it may be that we're saying that with our words, but they may not necessarily feel that on a deep energetic level. And I'm not saying that that's the case with Marley by any means, but it's just something that I've really become aware of, that so many people are speaking about their children's interrupted sleep patterns and not necessarily making that link back to the fact that as a parent, you're dealing with way more stress than you would have ever dealt with, which means that the moments that you would have normally been more present, maybe you're not feeling as present and your child's not feeling as connected. And so I feel like there's an inevitability that there will be a trickling forth into our children. And I see that with my own son, who's 2, where his anxiety levels have gone through the roof at two. And I would describe it as kind of like irrational fears that started off really small and have just continued to kind of grow. So, you know, for example, when we went from being in a space of lockdown to then being in a space where we could be with numbers of people, he would not leave my side. He would just cling to me for the whole time. He stopped making eye contact with other adults. You know, he would just look at me and constantly reassure, like he would turn my face and look into my eyes and be like, "Mummy, who's that? Mummy, who's," you know, like there was a sense of reassure me that this is okay. And at the time, you know, that's kind of calling on me to be present in ways that I had not been called to be present for up until that point. You know, I'm used to being able to be in company with others and hand him to my mom or hand him and it was literally like, no, okay, he's with me. And so yeah, and realizing like, okay, this goes a bit deeper, you know, this goes deeper because I believe he's sensing into the sense of fear, the sense of lack of trust, the sense of pressure, and also sensing into the way that other adults were perceiving him in places where he would have naturally kind of reached out. All of a sudden that was kind of being checked, you know? And so all of these really seemingly subtle, separate things, I believe, have deep effects on the ways that our children's nervous systems are being regulated. And so this work to me of being able to become aware of that as an individual, as a mother specifically, is even more crucial right now. And rest is a key in being able to do that.
Yeah. Before you get into rest, I just want to thank you for that. Because it is true, and it's not something that I thought about. I mean, Marley's 18 months, she's teething, but also she's spent the majority of her young life not majority, but a large section, a third of her young life in this pandemic situation where it was just the 4 of us for a really long time, right? So you sharing that is making me think, gosh, yeah, it's not just the older one who's 7 who you who can vocalize it, so I see and feel and can hold it, but also possibly for that 18-month-old as well. So.
Definitely. And for babies who are born into this time, you know, whose mothers have either not been supported during birth or aren't feeling supported right now, or because of restrictions aren't able to be supported by family or friends, I believe that we will see the ramifications of that play out in the emotional development of the child, because the health and well-being of the mother is the health and well-being of the child. And if that is in any way compromised because of lack of support or lack of resources or lack of holding, you know, community holding, energetic holding, that can't not have an effect on how that child develops. And so it sounds heavy, potentially pessimistic, but to me it's more of an opportunity to really resource mothers and fathers and new babies and children to have tools like these, like tools of mindfulness, like tools of self-regulation, like tools of being able to tap into resources beyond ourselves, so that we can remedy some of the impacts that I think we're all going to be experiencing.
And what you're sharing is helping to raise awareness, right?
Exactly.
Because we can only deal with what we're aware of. So.
Exactly. So rest,
yes.
So that was a really great opportunity to be able to speak in Tammy's membership group. And like, to this day, that was a while back, but to this day I still have people like messaging me and telling me how life-changing that was for them. And that was so reaffirming for me, because I hadn't actually shared that much on my beliefs around rest and how I viewed it in relation to how we are as women, and specifically women of color. And so there was just a lot in there that I was kind of like, I'm not sure how this will be received, but I'm gonna put it out there and see how it lands. And it landed really well. So I'm really grateful to Tammy for creating that space, and I'm so glad that it resonated with you. But yes, my experience with rest began when I did my womb wellness therapy training with Uma Dinsmore-Tooley, who is a yoga how would you describe her? Yoga teacher, practitioner, writer, author, and someone I really respect. She speaks a lot about the feminine aspects of yoga and wellness, which is something that hasn't had as much mainstream attention as it deserves to, because it really is paradigmically different, if that is even a word, to the standard mainstream yoga that a lot of us receive in say yoga studios or on YouTube. And so that was kind of my own mini awakening into what I had been knowing but hadn't articulated yet. And one of the key things that she spoke about was having yoga nidra as a daily practice. And so yoga nidra is the yogic term for yogic sleep, and it's a particular formation of kind of going through the body and relaxing the body in a particular formation. And then I realized, like, well, not everybody is going to have had access to a yoga nidra training or a yoga nidra teacher, or who would have even kind of connected with what yoga nidra is. How can I bring these benefits to mothers who maybe don't have that practice or that awareness? And for me, it began just with introducing and inviting women to lie down and be still, and to pause from all of the things that needed to be done, and to recalibrate from the desire to achieve everything before feeling like we were worthy of rest, or before we'd earned rest, and realizing like that was something that was so deeply ingrained in so many of our responses to how we organize our time and our energy, that was leading to so much burnout and so much exhaustion and fatigue. And it become a conversation where that was seemingly like a badge of honor, you know, especially in the entrepreneurship, business owner, online space, where it's like, you know, the other person sleeping, you're working, you know, or, you know, get rich or die trying, like all of that kind of like grind, hustle, like work harder than everybody else so that you can get to the top. And I was like, this is not serving us. This dogma, that narrative, it's leading us to push beyond our capacities and to drain our core energy in a way that we then find really hard to replenish if we've done that chronically over time. And so instead of waiting until we break down, or until we have a nervous or mental breakdown, or until our body starts to display disease, which is literally dis-ease, right? The inability to be at ease. Why don't we start to cultivate these practices where we can be in harmony and we can regulate ourselves and we can be at rest more often and more regularly? And so that was the practice that I invited women to go with me on. And I saw the benefits. I felt the benefits myself. I felt the relief. I felt the release. I felt the kind of perspective that I gained from being able to actually take a breather and step back from all of the things that were seemingly so pressing and seemingly so important, that sometimes even after a rest period, I'd be like, do you know what? That's not even needing to be done anymore.
It's off
it's off the list. I don't even because the space that I was moving from before was essentially coming from a space of fear. It was, I don't have enough time. I'm not going to be able to get this done. I'm going to let this person down. I'm going to, so-and-so is going to think that I'm not this way inclined because I haven't got back in X amount of time. Like all of that is external pressure being internalized and putting my internal state in a space of dis-ease, right? So nobody else is carrying that. I'm carrying that. If I'm carrying that continuously over and over, that is going to start to show up in my body. No one else's. So it was that permission to be like, I can put these burdens down, even just for 10 minutes, even just for 20 minutes, however long I've committed to that day, to just breathe and be and not need to do anything for anyone. And for me, it was revolutionary, and it continues to be. And that's the message that I continue to share with as many women who are ready to hear it as possible.
It's so important. And it resonated so much the way you talked about it. Yoga Nidra is life. I
believe so too.
Yoga Nidra. Especially when I'm not getting a lot of sleep. I know that I do Yoga Nidra, the sleep that I am getting is more restorative and
right.
helping so much. But there were a couple of things that really resonated that when you talk about rest is the notion of having to earn rest. And I think that was one of the things when you were talking, I was like, hold on. Is Nehanda suggesting that almost my day is reordered? Because the way that our days work, right, is like we would go to work or do whatever we're doing, work really, really hard, and then you rest at the end, which then suggests that you rest as a reward for working hard.
Exactly.
And coming from a Caribbean background as well, with grandparents and parents who are like, we came here to work. Work is what we're going to do.
Right.
Then what I saw from all of the women and men that have come before me is that work and you rest afterwards. And I remember having a conversation with a friend and we were talking about rest, and I was like, yeah, but the rest is even sweeter when you're knackered. And it's like,
is when that actually true? Yeah.
It changed my whole perspective on what rest is.
I really feel into that contextualization, and I know I spoke a little bit deeper than that in my talk around the kind of ancestral imprinting that we each carry through how time not being spent productively, or where others could be seen to know that you were doing something productive, where there's no necessarily outward evidence of what that's going to kind of quantify, right? It's like, what are you doing right now? I'm actually not doing anything. Why aren't you doing something? You should be doing something. You should be busy, because if you're not, you're going to be getting into trouble. And if you're getting into trouble, then it's going to come back round. And it's that sense of like, we're here on borrowed time. I think that's what a lot of the elder generation had, that sense of like, we've been given this lifeline. We want to make the most of it. We want to honor the privilege that we've been seen to receive and to make the most of this opportunity. And so that was a very natural response to what would have been a very hostile environment, where actually to survive, you needed to be working 2 jobs. You know, everybody needed to be doing their bit to contribute. Like economically, that was a necessity because that we weren't afforded equal opportunities.
It was survival.
It was survival. And so that gets passed down, and we see that, even if it hasn't been spoken to us in the ways that it has in some instances, but we see that, and we may not have even had a memory where we've even seen our parents enjoying non-activity. Like, when were your parents just not busy? You know, like, when did they ever do anything that replenished themselves? When did they carve out space or time or permission to luxuriate in the time that we are alive, where we hadn't got to work for somebody? You know, and a lot of us in this generation have afforded that privilege, and it still is, I guess, experienced by many as a privilege. Like, rest is for people who've amassed a certain amount or have had a certain number of achievements in the world, or who can, you know, kind of swan away and be ladies of leisure. And we have this kind of, you know, stereotypical reductionist view of people who've earned the value of being able to rest. And the way that I've internalized it and remembered it is, rest is our birthright. The fact that we're alive and breathing means that not only are we worthy of rest, but we essentially need rest as a human necessity. And so it needs to be as important as water, as food, because it's our natural biochemic need. And so when we can recognize that, it can then take on the sanctity of a practice, where we make that something that we show up for, and we boundary and we communicate in a way that starts to teach others, okay, you might not be doing that for yourself, but I'm going to be doing this for myself, because I know I'm going to feel better as a result. And I know that I'm going to be able to show up differently, which will essentially serve you as well. So let's just all work together on mummy's rest, because really we will all be happy. And so that to me has been the revolution. And I think for so many women, you know, the more we can yield and surrender and soften to the fact that we need rest. And when we're tired, even when we're not tired, rest is a sacred practice.
I feel like I got really into it, and probably after your masterclass, and then the pandemic made it go out the window.
Right.
And I would get glimpses of it. And then one of the commitments that I've made to myself as we continue through this marathon is that rest is a priority. And should there be a time when I've got both children at home with me, that kind of situation, we build rest into it. And when I started to do it, I noticed my daughter getting involved, and that modeling, I was like, that is so powerful. If I need, and I shouldn't need an incentive other than the rest, but sometimes we do. And that was really, really helpful for me when I then saw my daughter go into her little tent and be like, Mummy, I'm resting now.
Oh, beautiful. Okay. Beautiful. That's amazing. And I think it plants that seed that there can be times when nothing necessarily is happening. It doesn't mean anything's wrong. You know, like I see, like sometimes with my daughter, she's like asking about the next thing. And even when she started the thing, she's asking about the next thing. Like what are we doing? And it's like, there's this racing forward, and I have to just kind of ground her and be like, we're enjoying this moment right now. Now, I'm not going to give you the information about what we're doing next. One, because I might not have the answer, but two, because there can be some space in the day that we haven't filled. And that's okay. In fact, it's really healthy. There needs to be these downtimes, because how else can we receive? That's the key. It's how, especially for those of us who are spiritually inclined, or who have a belief that, you know, we are vessels for messages and for communicating things that are not just coming from our brain all the time. Because that's often where the tiredness comes from, is because we feel we're the sole generator of everything in our lives. And so for those of us who don't believe that and who recognize that we are part of a bigger, macrocosm, how will you receive that wisdom, that intuition, that instinct, that guidance, that nudge, that whisper, if there's no space in your life for stillness, for silence, for peace? And so for me, what I've started to show with her is you can't process what you've just done if you don't have some space between that and the next thing. It's actually an exercise in savoring. Like, how can you squeeze the juice out of what's pleasurable in life? Because you actually have a window of time to get grateful and to open to that.
It's one of those concepts that on paper, it seems so simple, right? Like, so you say rest and people are like, yeah, I know. It's a lot of, I know what that is. I know what you're talking about, and kind of reducing it to whatever they've got the ideas in their heads. But actually, and what you've touched on here is demonstrating so much more. It's almost like, as you're talking, I'm seeing rest in the middle. And sometimes I think in mind maps. So I'm seeing rest in the middle, and there's all of these different strands off of it that lead to other things. And often what people desire is actually in those strands off of what is intrinsically within rest. And it's the unlearning of the beliefs and stories that we're holding about rest and why we don't do it and what it looks like and the conditions that we might put on it is indicative of so much more.
Definitely.
Right?
And
so when you start to do this
definitely
work with you, it unravels so much about so I talk about my complex relationship with rest. It's about so much more than that.
Definitely. And it's a really beautiful kind of linchpin it's like a gateway, because all of the things that we hold on to, like dearly, will show up. As soon as you've said, I'm committing to actually committing to showing up for this rest practice, all of the reasons are going to come up why this is not a good idea, or maybe why this is not the right time to begin it, or why everything else is happening in the world which needs your attention, and why whatever the things are going to start flooding in. And our job is to become aware of it, to notice it, to get curious about it, and to begin to use our discernment to kind of trace that back. When did I first feel that? Whose voice is that? Is that even mine? Is that even true? What happens if I don't do that? And it gives us this gateway into so many parts of ourselves that have otherwise remained hidden because we've just been doing busy, and wearing the trope of it. Like, somebody's going to give us a badge for being busy for the majority of our lives. No, it's going to be a disease. That's what you're going to get, and we don't link that when we see elders suffering with particular illnesses we don't link that to the fact that they never rested, in their 30s, in their 40s, in their 50s, or they never had an opportunity to replenish after having children, or that they were never allowed to rest during their menstrual cycle. All of these things to me are kind of coming back to our reason on Dietrich for being alive. All of the things that we chase are because we want to feel more validated in our beingness. So why don't begin with that, validate ourselves by honoring the rest, and then signal to the body that this is the place that I'm going to allow all of these things to happen, that I'm going to co-create these external realities to match up with the fact that I've actually allowed myself the peace of rest.
Can you write a book?
I would love to write a book. It's in the works. I definitely need to continue to develop these ideas in a way that I can give them more time, because I know we're coming to time. But I just, like you say, I'm so aware that it brings up so much. And for us as women, and specifically for women of color, I just feel like that goes really, really deep.
Yeah, it goes deep, because we need the rest, and the reasons why we don't are so layered. And as you start to unpack that, it just leads to so much.
Definitely.
So much freedom, so much liberation, and what I believe is the true essence of self-love.
Love that.
in that. Yeah. Oh my goodness, I could talk to you all night, literally.
It feels like we've only just begun, right?
It really does. I have to get you back on because, yeah, you've got so much wisdom. I cannot wait to read that book.
Oh, yes.
Whenever it comes.
Hopefully in its divine time. I am definitely at a space where I've kind of stopped rushing everything. And so I know the book is there somewhere.
You've got all of the ideas, right? Like they're there and they're continuing to evolve.
Exactly.
But thank you for blessing us with your knowledge and your wisdom. And what makes me really excited, I mean, I'm excited about all my podcast guests, but you specifically, is that I know that people listening, there's so much in there. Like it can be just one thing that just changes so much. Like when I heard, you talk about rest doesn't have to be earned. And I was like, what? Texting my best friend. We were even talking about it yesterday. It's just undoing so much learning in such an easeful way.
That's exactly how I would love this work to feel. And yeah, I think, for people who have even just picked up, one thing and want to continue to build on that, this is the work that I feel called to support. And so, whether it's through one-to-one coaching or whether it's through reading the blogs or for listening to the Soul Mama podcast, everything that I do, the golden thread is how can we awaken and heal? It's just more of that. So I really pray it served whoever's listening.
It will, especially at this time and beyond, but especially at this time. Thank you so much. I will link up to all of your links in the show notes.
Beautiful.
Thank you, my love.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, you know what I'm going to ask you to do. Please head over to Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star review and rating, as it helps this important conversation and message get to more people. Also, please feel free to share it with anyone who you think needs to hear it. I'll see you on the next episode.